there's two sides to every coin. Then there's a conversation you can join. But I'm an old dog and there's new tricks. And some of my opinions you just can't fix. 'Cause I'm an old man yelling at the sky. I'ma shake my fists at the clouds and cry. Get off my lawn, you snowflake, before I have a meltdown, breakdown, shakedown. 'Cause this is my hometown, so back down, sports clown. It's all just a game, and it's the last down, let down, cowtown. I said it's all just a game. I give the touchdown, the rundown, the lowdown. 'Cause it's over the game, gonna crack down, shut down, the sundown. I said it's all just a game.
Hi, kids. Happy Friday to Friday. I was just going over this in my mind. Is it a hump day or is it Wednesday? And of course, I start with Friday. So that pretty much is going to set the tone for the program. Welcome. It is Wednesday for those who care or are concerned about those types of details being accurate. Today would be Wednesday. It would be the 18th of October. Glad you're here. My name's Rob. You know who you are. Jack is he's doing it under the weather, but he's here, a trooper that he is. So we're going to get this show underway in a little while. Peter Maher, the NHL legend, the Hall of Famer for the Calgary Flames, is going to join us. Lots to talk about with Pete. Some Flames stuff and some NHL things. We got a rendering of what the Heritage Classic is going to look like. We can get into that in a little while, and a little bit of NFL stuff. And I do want to, if we can, check in on a project. The LA Clippers are going to open a new building, and they've got some real innovation in their building. And I'm very curious to see if innovation is going to be part of what we see in Calgary with the new building here, or if it's just, state of the art of the standard, just like all other, just state of the art, but, no innovation. So we'll get into that. We are broadcasting live from Treaty 7 territory. Glad you are with us. We are an inclusive program. Everybody is welcome here. Do want to give a thanks and a shout out to Ken Dryden, who joined us on Monday. Enjoyed that conversation greatly. If you have not seen it, did not listen to it, go back and check out the podcast. My understanding is when I refer to you checking out a podcast, make sure you review it and give it a big love thing, lots of stars, whatever it is. Anyway, but Ken was awesome. Enjoyed the conversation. Certainly towards the end, if you're a hockey fan, and he weighed heavily into kind of the situation involving headshots and just the overall leadership in hockey right now. So really appreciate Ken joining us. When last we spoke, the Calgary Flames were getting set to play their third game of the year. That game is now over, has been for a while, as a matter of fact. They fall in a shootout by a 3-2 score. A game number 3 of a season likely shouldn't be as newsworthy as this one was, unless it's for the right reasons. It really wasn't for the right reasons, but we'll get into that. Well, I think one of them was a really right reason, actually. Calgary 1 for 5 on the power play. Penalty kill continues to be good, 3 for 3. So they shut down Ovechkin. 10 for 10, I believe, to start the season through 3 games. So they picked up where they left off penalty kill wise. Certainly had opportunities to put this game away, did not. And as a result, ended up going through a shootout and into overtime, where one of the stories comes up. But let's dial it back a little bit. Calgary nursing a 2-0 lead. And then Matt Phillips, formerly of the Calgary Flames organization, but of Cochrane, a guy that we've talked an awful lot about on this program, really became somewhat of a mascot, if you will, for the trials and tribulations of this organization. I mean, we had Craig Conroy on here. They wanted to keep him. But I think at the end of the day, the player wanted a fresh start, got a fresh start in Washington. Of course, Mitch Love, his former head coach with the Wranglers for the last couple of years, was hired by Spencer Carberry and is part of the staff there. So there was a connection there. Had a good training camp, was quiet in a 4-0 loss to Pittsburgh, but in game number 2 for the Capitals, he scored the first goal for Washington, assisted on the tying goal, was named the first star. You likely could have only written a better script had you had him scoring in the shootout or in overtime. Having said all of that, take the Flames component out of it. Really happy, really happy for Matty Phillips. I like the kid. He's the underdog, right? The size is always going to be against him. It's easy to dismiss that size. I hate to be the yeah, but guy, and I don't mean to be the yeah, but guy. Good. That's one. Now go do it again. The challenge of the National Hockey League is not necessarily arriving, it's staying. Just ask Austin Czarnik, a young Austin Czarnik who the Flames had for a year, got him away from Boston on a contract, and he was just a great kid in the community. I guess it was 2 years, I think. Great kid, good in the community, had potential, lit it up in the American Hockey League, but just never found his place at the NHL level, and continues to this day. I mean, he's on another organization. He's with another organization. Actually, he's with Detroit now. I could be wrong on that. And bounces up and down. I want Matty Phillips to be a everyday NHLer. So what he did Monday against Calgary, tonight in Ottawa, he's got to do that against the Senators. He's got to keep doing it. We showed the picture of him last week and pushing the practice pucks. He's got to stay hungry. He's got to be humble and all those things, which I think he's capable of doing. But, from that standpoint, really happy for him. Tough break for the Flames. I mean, you kind of want those games. If you're Craig Conroy in the organization, you kind of want those things to go quietly into the night. And just, he can have the breakout game tonight against Ottawa, but that's not necessarily how this works. So with that said, the Flames move on. They're off today again, 2 days in a row. They'll be in Buffalo tomorrow. They're in Buffalo now, but they'll take on the Sabres tomorrow, coming off a win against Tampa Bay. And then back to back, they're into Columbus on Friday night. So expectation, you'd have to think, is we'll see Dan Vladar with one of these starts in the next couple of games. Overall, just to go back to that Washington, I just feel like it's old news now, but yeah, I mean, they were better than they were in the first 2 games, deserved a better fate, didn't create a better fate. And that there's a difference there. I'm all for earning a better fate, but you got to create a better fate. And that conversation to me is very similar. Oh, we got goalie stood on his head. Well, there's only so many times that you can use that before you begin to question the offense. And I know the guys on Barn Burner have talked about this. We can talk about this with Peter Maher when he joins us, but man, sometimes it looks like the Flames are chopping wood through 3 games. We're able to respond really well against Washington or against Winnipeg in game 1. The game in Pittsburgh, we're really good through 40, but only had 1 goal up, and that cost them as they got blitzed early. And then in this game, not only did they blow a 2-goal lead, but they had great opportunities down the stretch. Again, power play opportunity that they didn't cash in. So early in the season, one of the things I was, watching with great interest was to see how Ryan Huska would handle this, because he's been so media friendly and so out there, and just a complete change from what we saw from Darryl, at least in that aspect of this business. And so far, continues to have a positive outlook on it. I mean, they're legitimately they really are the epitome of 500 at this point. But I can definitely tell, and you watch Barn Burner, the guys are already going down this feels familiar territory, and I get that part. So this club owes it to its fan base, owes it to itself, owes it to the management to kind of shake that and prove that they're not just another incarnation of the same team we've seen here for the last 4 or 5 years. One last point, Kuznetsov. I know a lot of people talked about this. His shootout goal basically glided, didn't even, really didn't take any skating strides, was incredibly slow, came in, beat Markstrom. That ends up being the game winner. I don't know. I'm kind of to the point now with all of you. I'm done with shootouts. They served their purpose, and I think they were, they jostled the league when the league needed some jostling. When they came in the 04 after the 04-05 lockout, they jostled the league that needed some jostling. We needed to shake it up and get away from ties and all of those sort of things. It jostled it. But again, what we saw, if you're going to keep them in, and if you're going to allow that, then the hell with it. Let's give it a 15-second shot clock. And as long as the puck's live, keep going. Right? Take a shot, goalie stops it, but you got 7 seconds, go get the puck, keep going. I don't know what else you do because of the adaptation of the coaches. Again, I keep quoting the barn burner, but they would be the measuring stick in this conversation because they've been talking about this. But even watch 3-on-3 now. 3-on-3 is not what it was when it first came into the league. It's not. It's overcoached again. And we're not giving up the puck. We choose not to give up the puck. God bless the NHL for trying. I just have this sneaking suspicion if you created an overtime, which was your two goalies, and that's it, one puck, some coach would find a way to play defense on it. If you truly want to create excitement that cannot be defended, if you truly want to create mistakes that lead to scoring chances, if you truly want that type of opportunity and those types of chances, you've got to eliminate the coaching. And there's no way they're going to do that. There's no way they're going to do that. And I, much to my chagrin, or much to the chagrin of my friend Rob Cookson, I said this 10, 15 years ago. We were complaining about scoring. You want more scoring? Create mistakes. You got to introduce mistakes. That's why junior hockey is so exciting. There's still mistakes in junior hockey. There's getting to be the same resources. There's getting to be the overcoaching, but the coaches are too good. The data is too good. The ability to adapt on the fly is too quick. So now even 3-on-3 overtime can become boring. The shootout, we're going to go through every match, imaginable combo of we're going to slow down, we're going to go fast. Unless you do something radical, you're not going to change any of this. So I know we want to get rid of the shootout and go to 10-minute 3-on-3. Sure. But if we do that, be prepared for the consequence of that. The unintended I don't even know if it's unintended. The consequence of that will be the coaching. The coaching will adapt. During the lockout of 12-13 before the season came back, spent a lot of time in the American Hockey League, and NHL was testing things. And one of the things they were testing was the no-touch icing. And I just remember the first bunch of games in the American Hockey League, it was kind of hectic and turnovers happen and things like that. As soon as the coaches realized that it was actually not so much about getting to the puck, but getting a race to the dot or whatever to get that, they changed it, and it's safer, which was the main intention, but it certainly didn't create any more mistakes or challenges or things like that. So I know a lot of people debating the merits of Kuznetsov and Kuznetsov, I should say, and the way he approached Markstrom. You've allowed this to happen. It's within the rules. Unless you want to put a shot clock on it, not that he would have dragged, maybe he would have, but if you really want to radically, approach your overtime, then put a shot clock and say the puck's live, unless it's covered. You take a shot and the goalie catches it, dead. But if it goes off the pads into the corner, you might have 6 seconds to bring it back out. Won't happen in a million years. Don't get me wrong. And I'm not advocating. I'm just saying that's the other option. The one thing I suspect we're going to see here real soon is the elimination of the shootout and going to a 10-minute 3-on-3. But even there are teams, not all, and I shouldn't say not, there are some really good fire wagon back and forth 3-on-3s, but there are also some coaches that will take the opportunity to grind it, slow it down, and make sure that they're not giving up anything. One other NHL note, and I want to get to a couple other things, NFL and NBA things. Elliot Friedman first reported this on Saturday, doubled down on it today. And now everybody else is kind of reporting on it. But the NHL is going to look at a decentralized draft. So much like the NFL and I believe the NBA, clubs stay home and the prospects attend. There is a desired change, probably not this year, but maybe in the coming year. That's according to Elliot. I don't know. I think there's two ways of looking at this. One, if you're a reporter or somebody in our peer group here, I went to drafts for almost a decade and loved it. Loved going to the other city, loved having all the players and all the coaches and all the GMs in one place, loved all the media, saw value in that, created content out of that. I think there's something to be said about having that event where everybody comes together. But I don't think that that's impactful on the audience that the NHL really, really cares about. It's more of a television audience that they want to draw, and I think the other part of that is they want to accommodate the teams who feel like there's a lot of business that they can do, a lot of work that can be done. So anyway, we'll get to some of the NFL stuff, and I want to look at an NBA building, just give you that food for thought. Our next guest has been to drafts too. He might even have a thought on it. Of course, brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. 76 years. 76 years. Now, they didn't have the website for all 76. They may as well, though, but they've had the service and the care and detail attention for 76 years, soon to be 77 years. When they fire up fully, 4 locations. Right now, 2 locations. You can check them out, McLeod Trail by Chinook Center, Bow Ridge Road Northwest by McDonald's, at the bottom of the hill by Winsport. And again, check out the snowboards. Check out the traditional skis. Check out the snow skating. Everything you need. We bring in the Hall of Famer, I believe 7 Halls of Fame, if we're going to be honest about all of this. He's our good friend, our dear friend, and he is the voice of the Calgary Flames for so many of us. Peter Maher joins us here on a somewhat gloomy, I guess, Pete, fall day, but typical fall day. How about that? Well, Pete, we can't hear you. Oh, Pete, we can't hear you. Oh, did you get it? Oh, you got you on mute there. We had the same problem with Ken Dryden, so you're in very elite company. We'll get Pete connected up here. That's the beauty of live, right? If we did the podcast and just put it out, you'd never know the fun and frivolity that we're having back here. But here we are. So we will try and get Pete back here momentarily. We've done this before. We know it works. We'll get them all set up. By the way, mention the Flames back in action tomorrow against Buffalo, and then Friday against Columbus, Sunday against Detroit. We will have Afterburner after all of those shows, so make sure you check out Afterburner. So when the game's over and you want to find out what happened, or if you want to bounce some ideas, or if you're thinking you thought what was happening, it's a good show to do that with. So Afterburner coming up immediately following tomorrow's game, Friday's game in Columbus, and Sunday's game coming up in Detroit. And a great opportunity as well to throw some questions in the chat, as well as Jack will, as always, we've adopted this now for the last month or so, but fire away your questions, your comments, put them in the chat. Jack and I will take a look at them and get to them here in a little bit. Flames relatively quiet on this trip from the standpoint of doesn't seem to be any significant injuries. Nobody's really in the doghouse at this point. Sometimes you go on this road trip, which you heard Huska. Huska wanted to do the road trip early. So anyway, let's do this. We'll bring Pete back. Pete, how about this time? Can I hear you this time?
Hello. I can hear you fine.
Oh, good. Perfect.
As you know, Rob, I'm not a technical genius. I once broadcast a whole period of a hockey game that nobody heard. because I hadn't put the telephone line into the broadcast equipment.
So. Pete, we were never hired for that part. We were hired for other things, right?
I think I told the story about the time the Lanny McDonald was going for his 50th goal in the 1982-83 season, and it was on a Friday night in Buffalo. The game started 5 o'clock Calgary time. There was no TV of the game anywhere. It was strictly on radio. And so Doug Barkley, who's my color commentator, we're in there ready to do the show when the broadcast line kicks out. So then I grabbed the telephone there in the broadcast studio. There were no cell phones in those days, back in 83. And so we start handing the phone back and forth, talking as the play-by-play is going on. Then that line kicked out, didn't work anymore. And so now I'm sitting there for about 10 minutes, not on the air, thinking, Lanny, please don't score now. Wait. And Lanny must have been listening because he waited until the third period to score his 50th goal. That turned out to be the only goal the Flames scored in that game, but that was his 50th goal, the first Calgary Flame to have a 50-goal season. So we almost missed it, but we didn't get it on.
Yeah, but can you imagine? I know it's all good, but can you imagine, Pete, like if you didn't have coverage of a game today, right? Like, radio's always been your friend. Radio never lets you down. Television, that's a different story. And that, nobody got to see that, right? They got to hear it, but nobody got to see it in Calgary.
Yep, that's right. If you go back into the 80s when the Flames first arrived here, over half the games weren't on television. In fact, that went on until almost the 2000s when, the sports networks came in. And that's when we started to see all the Flame games on television. And, for the longest time, half of them weren't on TV. So it was always a radio audience. And, everywhere I go, a lot of places I go to, people will come to me and say to me, I grew up listening to you. I'd be in my dad's car and he'd be listening to the Flames game. And I don't know how many times I've had that mentioned to me over the years. In fact, it happened again once this last week here. So yeah, it's an amazing situation how it was back then and how so much has changed now.
The crazy one, and I'm sure you got these too, but with AM signals, and I'm not a scientist and I'm not an engineer, so I don't know exactly how it works, but we both know that in the winter when it's colder, signals can be stronger. And it was not uncommon for us at the radio station to get a package from Sweden or Finland where somebody caught the game and recorded it on cassette tape and say, hey, I'm over in Finland and I got this skip, which absolutely blew my mind. Again, I don't understand how science works, but it's crazy sometimes. The old AM, that's a part of this. Modern technology is great and AI and all that stuff, but there's something to be said about a good old AM radio in the middle of winter.
Yeah, no question. I got similar responses you got, Rob, from people over in Europe who are listening into some of the games for some reason. I don't, as you say, I have no idea technically why that happened, but it was amazing back in those days. So but it's changed so dramatically now. So, and some of it, a lot of it for the good, some of it not for the good.
Speaking of good, before we get too far into the hockey, I want to go back to between this visit and our last visit. You were active and busy on Thanksgiving with the walk and run for Alzheimer's. Pete, how did it go?
Rob, it was the largest participation and the most fund-raising event that we have had in the history of the Alzheimer's walk and run. It was just an incredibly beautiful day. I mean, the temperature eventually that day, I think, got to be 25. The walk and run, of course, was in the morning, starting at around 10 o'clock. And, it was beautifully out and not quite that warm. But I remember going in there with a heavy jacket on and that sort of thing. Sure. And wasn't far into it. Took some clothes off. It was that type of day. And, of course, the spirit of that event is something that has always drawn me to it. Of course, I've been the honorary chair for that event now for 16, 17 years. And, the very first time that I went, I was just amazed with the participation of the people, and a lot of them bringing one of their loved ones or two of their loved ones who are affected by dementia or Alzheimer's and had them in wheelchairs, and we're wheeling them around the route of the walk. And so, the intense emotion of those events is certainly something that I've always been drawn to and will continue to be drawn to. as long as I can. And certainly we had a great outing. I want to thank the many people who came. We not only had a record number of people participating, but we got a record amount of dollars earned from that event. So that made it really worthwhile getting that kind of response from the Alzheimer Calgary Walk Run.
Well, I'm lucky to have had a mentor like you and a mentor like Mike Rogers, because right when I got here and joined you guys in 2003, both of you have always been active in the community and causes like this and showing up when it matters the most. So good on you, Pete, and continued success. Obviously, you have no desire to slow down, so continued success with that.
I hopefully will be able to continue on that for a good long while.
I owe you a bit of an apology. When we last visited, I missed one thing on your list, Pete, and I feel terrible about it. And I want to go back because I have not given you the opportunity. Last Thursday, we said goodbye to Chris Snow. It was an incredible eulogies given, and just the whole day was very special. But I just wanted to give you an opportunity because I did accidentally miss that point the last time you were here.
Yes, he's just a tremendous guy. I didn't get to know him closely as you did, Rob, over the last bunch of years where I haven't been involved with Flame broadcasts and that sort of thing. But I remember meeting Chris back in Minnesota when he was working with Doug Risebrough, the former Flame player, general manager, and coach. But then he eventually went to Minnesota and was general manager of the Wild, and he hired him as an analytical guy, basically to work in the management role for that team and be one of the very first, if not the first, analytical person involved in the National Hockey League. And Chris, of course, had a bit of a baseball background from his time in Boston, where he was a sports writer there. And I got to know him a little bit, as I say, when he was in Minnesota, when the Flames would be playing the Wild. He'd have a little bit of a chat with him. And then when Doug Risebrough got let go as GM in Minnesota, Chris was gone as well. But the Flames stepped right in and brought him into Calgary to introduce that type of analytics to the Flame organization. And obviously, it's very, very valuable all those years that he had in the Flames organization, not only with the analytics, but also involved in management, being the assistant general manager for a number of years, involved in negotiations with players for salaries and contracts and that sort of thing, and also passing on valuable information to the coaching staff. And from what he can understand, was almost right up to the time that he passed away, that he was involved in helping the team out. And he actually went out to Penticton when they had the Young Stars had their event out there with the other teams from Western Canada. And that was very shortly before he went into very much discomfort and ultimately passed away. So certainly my sympathies to he and his family. They have certainly set up a great cause for LSD. And interesting to note that the two road games the Flames have played so far, the home team is getting involved in the Chris Snow situation with ALS and asking people to make donations to that cause and having their 50-50s focused in that direction. So it's great to see that is being helped out in that manner. That'll leave Snowy's time with the world and his family continuing to go on and hopefully be helpful for many thousands of people in the future if they can find a cure for that very difficult disease.
Peter, I don't really have a whole lot for you from my end. A couple things that I wanted to ask you about, but one weekend, let's start there. What have you seen so far? What's caught your attention in a 1-1-1 record for the Flames?
Well, Rob, in many ways, it's really too early to make any assessments of the team. 3 games into a campaign certainly is a very, very small barometer of what is going to take place as the season goes on. But, it was uplifting to notice that the power play is operating at a 27.3% success rate so far. Mark Savard, who I got to know when he played for the Flames back in 1999 and on to 2002. He was a very good hockey player. He was also a very interesting guy to interview. You may want to try to get him on this program sometime when the Flames are back in town, because I certainly enjoyed the chats I had with him back then. So a very knowledgeable hockey guy. He's been coaching in junior hockey, a little bit of NHL coaching experience and on the head or assistant coaching situation, and he is in charge of the power play. Now, it was a bit disappointing that the power play couldn't come through with a goal in the two chances they had late in the game against Washington the other night. But nonetheless, overall, it's producing at a much better rate than it was last year. And the penalty kill has been awesome as well, not allowing any power play goals again so far this season. So, another interesting aspect is that they have had the lead and lost leads in all three games they have played so far. Ultimately, they were able to win the game at home in their home opener that they had against Winnipeg. Although each time they had a one-goal lead, the Winnipeg would come back and tie it up, but ultimately the Flames would go on to win 5-3. And then, of course, they had the 2-0 lead in Washington the other night, only to have the Capitals come back and win that game in a shootout. And then, of course, they had a 1-0 lead over Pittsburgh in the game on Saturday. And then the Penguins came to life in the third period and were able to win that game by a 5-2 score. But when, I was watching that game and I was thinking, Flames having the lead going into the third period, was thinking, well, this is a real good sign, because Pittsburgh had played the night before in Washington and then had to travel back to Pittsburgh. Now, that's not a tremendously long flight, but nonetheless, it does take up time traveling back and then getting your homes and that type of thing, and 2 games and 2 nights. So I thought maybe the Penguins wouldn't have much in the tank for the third period, but unfortunately for the Flames, they did, and came on to score the 4 goals and gain themselves the victory in that contest. Another bright spot in that game from a Flames standpoint was Matt Coronado scoring his first NHL goal, and he scored it with that very quickness of a shot that we heard so much about when he was playing college hockey, and displayed a little bit of that last year when he got to play that one game with the Flames. But this looks like a guy that it's still early to bank heavily on this guy, but he certainly is showing, even in the regular season games thus far, that he's capable of playing in the NHL.
Pete, the observation that I made, because I agree with you on the release, but on that goal too. And it's not, it's not an amazing skill or anything like that, but it's an important skill, was his ability to push off and find the quiet ice. He didn't stay with the defender. He just quietly backed away. It reminds me a little bit of Camilleri and how Camilleri would get that one-timer going. He's got a long career ahead of him. He'll define what he is. But boy, there's a couple of little things in there from an offensive standpoint that are instinctive that you really like to see in young players.
Yes, definitely. I mean, he shows all kinds of great qualities for a guy so young and so little professional hockey experience. When he was playing in the college rank, I'm sure he was dominating things there. It's a much different game in the NHL, but he's certainly showing that he belongs with what we've seen from him so far. And I'm sure he's only going to get better as he gets more experience here with playing in the league and more experience with the teammates that he's playing with the Flames.
Can I get you to explain? I was explaining it on the last show, but it's better coming from you. Your rule of thumb when it comes to adjudicating teams. When do you begin to pay attention? When do you think you really learn about a team?
Well, Rob, this is a theory that I developed a long time ago, and obviously there are some exceptions to it, but usually you look at a team through the first 15 to 20 games of a regular season. And if you're surprised in a positive way, or if you're surprised in a negative way, you shouldn't draw conclusions at that point, because it's proven out that over the next 15 or 20 games, then you find out what your real team is. I mean, as I say, there have been some exceptions, but there have been times when I've seen Flame teams start off really, really poorly in those first 10, 15 games, and then get it together again in the next 15 or 20 games. And that is what you would see for the remainder of the season for the most part. And so that's the rule of thumb I have. I had a whole bunch of statistics on that when I was doing the broadcast of Flame games, producing the proof of that. And so it really is too early, 3 games into a year, to make an assessment of a team. Even a quarter of the way through, it's difficult to make an assessment of a team. Now, if a team you're expecting to start off really good, and it starts off really good. That's a normal course and likely to continue. Or if you have a bad team and it starts off poorly, that's likely to continue as well. But when it's a bit of a surprise, if teams get off to a strong start or a weak start, what you see over the second quarter of the season, to me, is when you get an opportunity to really see what your team is going forward for the balance of the year.
If I remember correctly, and I might be off by a year, but I want to say the 2001 or the 2002 Flames got off to a really good start under Roman Turek, was really good. And weren't they like the best team in the NHL through the first 20 games, and then the wheels fell off?
Yeah. If they weren't the best team in the NHL over the first 20, they were very, very close to that, Rob. And you're right. Then they get into that second quarter of the season, and the wheels just totally fell off the team. And ultimately, they didn't make the playoffs. Yeah. And when you get off to the type of start they had, you figured, well, even if they fall back a little bit, you should have enough in the bank here to make the playoffs, but that was not the case. It fell off so dramatically during that season. So it's that is, to me, is a really solid gauge. Not to get too excited over the first quarter of a hockey season if your team's doing well, or even if it's not doing that well, because sometimes it can bounce around, and most times it'll bounce around and you get to where it should be in the second quarter.
Now the Flames if you're going to give it a team. Oh, go ahead, Pete.
No, I was just noting the difference in the Flames starting schedule this year as compared to the one last year is rather dramatic. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're starting off the first year this year playing the first game at home and then on the road for 5 consecutive games. Last year, they played 9 of their first 10 games in the Saddle Dome. And I remember when I saw the schedule that time, before the season even got started, I was thinking to myself, Daryl Sutter, who was then the coach of the Flames, is not going to like this schedule with so many of those games at home at the beginning. And as it turned out, the Flames started off, they won their first 4 games of that start of the season. And then they lost 4 straight games at home, and then went on the road and lost 4 more straight games. And suddenly the team was off the pace that they had put in the start of the regular season. And this year, of course, they're starting off with 5 of 6 games on the road. I think if Daryl was still coaching, and in fact, usually the schedule is made up before the prior season is even over. So I would guess that Daryl Sutter last year, along with Flame management, put it into the NHL that they wanted to, if possible, start the season with more games on the road as opposed to having a heavily oriented home schedule. And this is why I think the schedule is starting this way, because Daryl didn't want it for this type of year this year, not knowing that he wasn't going to be coach of the team. So starting off with 5 or 6 on the road, it allows a team to develop a little bit of personal chemistry. You do that on the ice, and you do that off the ice, and you do it much better when you're on the road as a group. You get out to have dinners together, you have practices, and after practice you stay together more, whereby when you're at home you have a practice, and then the players go back to their families and their home life and that sort of thing. While on the road, they get a much better opportunity to mix. Now, yesterday was a total day off for the team after having played a game the night before. And so, that was a good opportunity, I would say, for them to mesh together. And, this going forward may be a big help for this team, the fact that they're starting off with 5 of these 6 games on the road. Hopefully they can come away with it with, at least a couple more, 3 more victories would be nice as well, to come back home with a pair of games and then move on to Edmonton for that game at Commonwealth Stadium. So I really like the setup the schedule has for the team this year. And also with the way it's shaping up with a game in Buffalo on Thursday and then a Friday game in Columbus, I'm sure we're going to see Vladar in goal for one of those games, and that'll give him an opportunity to see what he can show to the team as well as other teams around the league. Because with the Flames having young Wolf playing with their American Hockey League Wranglers here in Calgary, I'm sure they want to give him a look with the big team at some particular point. And I'm guessing that Vladar is likely the guy they may be shopping around to see if they can get a defenseman or a forward in return for him. So I'm sure he'll get to play one of these next 2 games for the team. Markstrom, I think, has been off to pretty good start for the team. I thought the first home game, he was the guy that basically saved it for them with the amounts of pressure that Winnipeg put on the Flames, especially in that first period of the game. And he came up with a number of great saves. He let in perhaps one goal or so in each of the games so far that I'm sure he'd like to have back. But so far, he's been performing better than we saw from him last season.
I was going to ask you that, and so you've answered that. So I'll skip to the next one, which is the other guy that everybody was paying attention to, Huberdeau. They've gotten their points. You and I were talking about Sidney Crosby and generational players in your last visit, and I thought that game in Pittsburgh, that was all on the back of Sidney Crosby in that third period. He only had one assist, but he came out and he absolutely dominated that period. Still haven't seen that from Huberdeau. Still haven't seen that from Kadri. Like, at some point, the Flames are going to need these guys to come up and dominate some shifts.
Yeah, I don't think that either one of those guys that you mentioned, Huberdeau or Kadri, are in the same caliber as Sidney Crosby. But they can have more effect on a game than they have been showing with the Flames basically at any time here with Calgary. I thought Kadri last year got off to a strong start with the Flames, and then his game tailed off, it seemed, more and more as the year went on. And maybe some of that had to do with the fact that the previous season he won a Stanley Cup playing with Colorado, and that season, of course, went into almost July, if not July, and it made for very little off season. But he's not getting himself off to a really great start either. And the same with Huberdeau. He made one play there to setting up a goal, but we haven't seen nearly enough of that. The advanced billing on him when he played with the Florida Panthers was that he was an excellent passer and doesn't shoot the puck nearly enough. He certainly doesn't shoot the puck nearly enough in this time he's been here with the Flames, but his playmaking ability has not been all that sharp as well on a consistent basis. So there's still, as they say, early, lots of time for these guys to pick it up. Part of it could be, too, the fact they're playing with a different system. They're playing more of that man-on-man system when Darryl was coaching, and now they're playing another style altogether. Sometimes that takes adjustment. You have a preseason. That's usually when you can make the adjustment. With the problem with the preseason games, you perhaps play only one or two of those preseason games with your regular lineup because you're giving young players an opportunity to see what they can do at the NHL preseason level. And as a result, you don't get your regular team out there until perhaps the last couple of games. So I give those guys, as well as others on the team, a little more time to see if they can get themselves more into form with the new system the team wants to play, that Coach Huskus wants them to play. And then maybe we can see these guys coming back to playing more to their potential and their abilities that we've seen in the past.
One, I guess, kind of last one on the Flames for me, and then if you got something else, that's cool too. A thought on that Kuznetsov shootout goal, Pete. I mean, you've seen every incarnation. You've seen, no overtime straight ties, 5-on-5 straight ties, 4-on-4 straight ties, then shootouts, 3-on-3. I get it. Like I watched it and I'm frustrated by it, but I understand it's in the rules. What did you think of it?
Well, as you say, he didn't break any rules, but my goodness, that was awful slow motion way that he came in on that shootout opportunity, and he almost easily scored the goal. I mean, you can say Markstrom maybe should have done something different, but if you're the goalie, and Rob, you of course have had experience as a goalie, not at the NHL level, and it's more as a talking goalie.
Yes.
How would a talking goalie handle that situation?
I would have screamed at him. Come on.
Move it.
Move it, exactly.
But an interesting aspect of Kuznetsov is apparently that when he started off on the shootouts, he wasn't having very much success going in with speed. And in fact, he had gone 6 consecutive shootout attempts without scoring. And then he talked with somebody on the coaching staff and decided to use a slow motion approach on a shootout situation. And he scored goals on 8 of the last 9 shootout opportunities that he's been on since he's using this slow motion movement to the net. And each time that he scored with a shot on the goaltender's stick side. And he makes that move, and then the goaltender may be a little bit startled, and he just shoots it to that stick side, and it goes in. And he apparently adapted this after not having any success on the shootout attempt. So he plans to continue that unless, and why not, unless the rules change, as you say, to put a time clock on that. But they can't do that until the off season. But you're right. And the 3-on-3s, when that first started, it was really entertaining to watch. And then the coaches got themselves much smarter to the 3-on-3s and adjusted accordingly. And as a result, the 3-on-3 situations have not been as exciting for the most part as we used to see back when it first started. And we get the odd game where there's a lot of good flow back and forth, but more time it's a game where the players are sitting back more so than being aggressive and going back and forth in a flow type situation. And a lot of them feel they have a better chance to win when they get to the shootout. And that's why unless you've got a great opportunity in the 3-on-3 to score, the coaches want the guys to be a little bit more on the defensive orientation.
So hear me out on this one, Pete. 60 minutes, the game is tied, and all of the coaches have to leave the bench. They have to go into the dressing room. And the players then decide no more overcoaching. The iPads, the assistant coaches, they go to the bench. And it's just up to the coaches. That's what we do. Create more that way.
That would be very interesting. But with the technology they have today, they may have headsets in the helmets of these players, telling them, slow it down.
Yeah. Drag it back out to center ice. Oh my gosh.
They could try that, but that technology sometimes catches up. It's just really, the coaches have every angle. Once they have seen it a little bit, they can find an angle to thwart what situations that we consider very entertaining to make it more to a point where they feel they have a better chance to win, and that doesn't make it an exciting product.
No.
But if you don't win, you're not going to be around a lot. So you've got to find all kinds of ways to win. So, but you're right. Take them off the bench. Take them into the room and lock them up.
And let the players solve everything, right? They can make the line changes. They can figure out who's going to shoot. It'll all work out. Leaving not really leaving the Hockey Heroes. We're 10 days away, or no, I guess 12 days away, I think, from the Heritage Classic. The original Heritage Classic was in Edmonton, but it didn't feature the Flames. But now they're going to do it, Pete. They showed the renderings today. I think you and I have had this conversation before. I'm a little disappointed in the NHL because they won't leave the ice in. And, it'd be nice if the junior teams could play and if the college teams could play and everything. And I get they want to protect the ice. Don't get me wrong. I understand why they're doing it. I'm really curious to see how this goes over, right? Because it wasn't that long ago. It was only 4 years ago that the Flames played their last outdoor game in Regina. It's far more common than it was, when obviously Edmonton did the first one, but Calgary in 2011. I'm very curious to see what the reaction is to this.
Yeah, I am too. I'm wondering what the ticket sales have been so far for this game in Commonwealth Stadium. As you say, coming up in 12 days. I'm not planning to attend, but I'm sure there are a number of Calgary people that are planning to attend. But I'm wondering just where the ticket sales are at this particular point in time. One good thing about it is that it's being held much earlier than the last outdoor game they had in Edmonton, and also much earlier than the outdoor game they had in Calgary, as well as the one you talked about in Regina. Having it in October would guarantee that you're not going to have minus 25, minus 30 temperatures for the game. So the weather should be more acceptable for the fans and for the players as well. I mean, I talked to some of the Flame players from the game they had here in 2011, and they were talking about how cold it was being on the bench, even though they had heaters there. When they get out onto the ice, it was extremely cold. So it should make it more comfortable for everybody playing this game in October. And so, it'll be interesting to see how the game itself goes and also what the attendance is going to be. But having it as a Battle of Alberta in October where the roads are clear as well, that Calgary fans can make that drive up to Edmonton to see the games also should boost the attendance for the game, unless it's gotten to a point where this outdoor game is no longer a novelty and the people aren't quite as interested in it as they used to be when it was first brought into the NHL.
The long range, Peter, for Edmonton is 3 degrees that day. So a low of -4, 3 degrees, partly cloudy. And that's important. And I know it's a long ways off, so things can change, but we know that sun is the enemy here. We do not want sunny days when you have these outdoor games.
That's right, exactly, absolutely, because that doesn't do any help for the ice as well when the game is going on and then back and forth. But you're also right that 12 days in advance for a weather forecast in Alberta is much too early. I remember, interesting you would say that. You talked about our Alzheimer's Walk Run that we had here a week and a half ago. We had a meeting about 10 days before that, and one of the ladies from the Alzheimer's office says, "Yeah, I was just checking the weather forecast for our event on October the 8th, and we're supposed to get some snow." And at that particular point in time, I said, "No, this is way too early to looking at the weather forecast." And as it turned out, as I mentioned earlier, it was an outstanding day, weather-wise as well as participation-wise. So 12 days in advance in Alberta, that's way too soon.
I keep saying we're going to leave the Flames, but and go on to some other things. I guess we are, but the Flames are in Buffalo tomorrow. And Pete, you and I haven't had a chance, but we said goodbye to an all-time great this summer, Rick Jennerette. I know you know Rick. I was a huge fan of Rick. Whatever the terminology you want to use, but it's funny. We were talking about the importance of AM radio and the importance of, your hometown broadcast, and Rick was really the epitome of that. And I know our times in Buffalo, you were always very generous in introducing me to Rick and saying hello. So it's going to be tough not having Rick around.
It is indeed, but based on what we've seen from games that have been played in Buffalo, he's not forgotten there. I mean, they observed their opening game, honoring his great career that Rick had with the Sabres. And they've got a monument out in front of the building there in Buffalo where the Sabres play. And I think there's also some pennants as well and other notations in the building with regard to Rick Jennerette with the RJ that is very prominent. And he liked to be called that RJ as his nickname. And ever since the time that I've known him, which goes way back to first time I met him was in 1978. And, it's interesting about Rick was that he started off, he was a morning radio man in Niagara Falls. And then the Sabres came to Buffalo, getting an NHL franchise, and he applied for the job and ultimately got it. And then I think for the first 2 or 3 years, he continued doing the morning show in Niagara Falls when the Sabres were at home, and then he'd go into Buffalo to do the hockey game that night. But then he would go on the road and travel with the team, and I guess he missed out on those morning shows in Niagara Falls then. But for about 2 or 3 years there, he was doing both of those situations, a morning show with music and then doing a play-by-play broadcast of the Sabres hockey. But a real great man, and unfortunately he left us over this past off-season. But as mentioned, Buffalo is not forgetting him, and most of us in the broadcasting business won't forget Rick Jennerette either. And his outstanding broadcasting is also his friendship that you had every time that the Flames and Sabres would get together. But Rob, we talk about that outdoor game that's upcoming. I don't know. I think I've talked to you about it before, but that game that we had here in Calgary at McMahon Stadium. To date, I still butt my head thinking it was the worst game that I ever broadcast. It was some of it was my own fault. I remember about a week and a half before that game, Don Phelps, who worked at McMahon Stadium, and he was also involved with the Calgary Canucks of the Alberta Junior Hockey League for many years. Anyway, he took me up to where the broadcast location was and still is for football games at McMahon Stadium. And so I went up there, and at that time they were putting the boards up for the hockey game. And so I get up there and I looked around, and you're certainly more to one end than you are the other. But I'm thinking, no, I think this will be okay, because I had been asked prior to that if I wanted to have a big screen put up in the broadcast booth, because the location to broadcast from was so far from where the ice surface was. But after being up there that day, I said, no, I think it'll be okay. We'll be able to do it real well. And then, of course, they had the Legends game on the Saturday, the day before the big game between the Flames and Montreal Canadiens. And on that particular Saturday, they had the Canadiens Legends against the Flame Legends. And I was up there and did the play-by-play broadcast of that game and had no issues at all. But then, because the Flames were wearing their regular Flame jerseys and the Canadians were wearing their regular jerseys that they would wear on a road game. But then came the Sunday game, and the Flames were wearing these uniforms that were paying honor to the Calgary's first professional hockey team, the Calgary Tigers. And so the uniforms were so much different. I mean, they were they're just a different kind of form. And reading the numbers from the distance I was at was really, really difficult. And I had no trouble calling the names of the Flames players, or the Canadians players. They were wearing their regular jerseys that they would wear. But the Flames one were really difficult to pick out the numbers, especially when the sun was out. And then it was kind of the glare coming off the back coming up to where I was broadcasting from. And I knew Mika Kiprasov was in net. And he certainly had quite a day getting the 4-0 shutout, making 39 saves in that game. And then the Flames, of course, pulling off the victory. But I was not pleased with my performance in the broadcast booth that game. It just took, usually I can, call a player, the snap of a finger. But that particular day, I had to hesitate at times, and certainly in times that you couldn't, unless you get turned in the right direction to read the number, you couldn't tell. And even when you were doing broadcast from the Saddle Dome, if you couldn't tell the number, you could almost see, could see the player much better than you could from that one. So it was, it was a game that I don't regret calling. I certainly, but I wish I had called it a lot better than what I did. Now, from a positive standpoint, the television broadcasters of that game were right down near ice level, and they were freezing to death in the minus 25 degree temperature that day. But up in the broadcast booth, at least we had warmth up there, even though it was a little more difficult to watch the game. So, I'm going to make a confession. That was the worst game of the 3,246 games that I broadcast.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you.
I'm glad they're not asking me to do the one in Commonwealth Stadium.
Well, I think the booth's a little closer, Pete, if we're going to be honest. I think the booth is a little closer. The one thing I did learn because of exactly what you just said was, the jerseys look spectacular and they were fantastic for everybody but a broadcaster. And and that's a lesson I learned. And I remember, a couple when I was with CSEC and working for the Calgary Hitmen, there were a couple of jersey incarnations we did where, we brought him out on the ice and sent Brad Curl up to the press box. Can you read the numbers? Like, there's some really good ideas, but can you read the numbers? Because it is still an important part of it. So if nothing, I don't know if it was your worst, Pete, but I do know it was a lesson that I learned. So nothing we could do about it, though. We weren't in charge of that.
We didn't see the jerseys until the game that day. So, but then again, and even when the Flames changed their 1 year more recently for the regular games, I forget now how they did that, but they had in the number they had a frame on it, and it made it real difficult from the distance we were broadcasting from sometimes to pick out the number, especially from the sleeve with the smaller number there. So and then soon after that they changed it to take that screen away from it. Basically, I think it was black and that they put into the white or something like that made it difficult to pick out numbers from our vantage point. But anyway, that, like I say, the jerseys are made to sell, not for the broadcast.
That's exactly it, right? We were not at the top of their list. Having said all of that, it was such a blessing when I started to travel with the team, especially south of the border, and you go to practices and they'd have practice jerseys with numbers and names. Like, that was such a blessing because you're so used up here just seeing helmet numbers, right? So
and then eventually they went back to those helmet numbers. I remember my last couple of seasons, I would sit right behind the net, about 3 rows from the ice. And because you're watching the morning skate, you like to do a little bit of a play-by-play of the other team in your head so that that you're ready for the game that night. And then they started going back to having the numbers back on the back of the helmets. And of course, they were so small you could only see them when they got really close. So, but again, the practices aren't for the broadcasters.
That's right. No, that's for the team, Pete. Let's leave the Flames for a bit. Just looking around the National Hockey League, one weekend, and again, too early to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I'm sure there's some people that are a little bit surprised. I guess the Edmonton Oilers sent us all a little bit of a note last night that they're going to be okay, but not a great start for them against Vancouver.
No, that had to be stunning in Edmonton to have those 2 games against Vancouver, which many people are feeling is not a playoff contending team, and yet the Oilers go into win Vancouver and lose the opening game. What was it, 8-1? And then you figure coming back home for the game on Saturday night. Now the Oilers are really going to be upset by getting beaten so badly in that opening game of the season that they're going to certainly turn the tables around in this game on Saturday night in their home ice. But as it turned out, they lost that game as well. And so I'm sure there was quite an outcry in Edmonton. What's wrong with our team that's supposed to be a Stanley Cup contending team, and they can't beat Vancouver in their building or in our own building? But as you mentioned, last night they certainly got things turned around in Nashville with their big stars coming through to show more and more of what we feel the Oilers team is. There was a lot of criticism of the goaltenders in those first 2 games, and that was something that was one big question mark going into the Oilers season. But last night was one game in which they turned it around. It'll be interesting to see now how they go forward with this. But I don't think they were as bad as they were. They're going to be as bad as they were in those first 2 games of the season against the Canucks.
Well, and take nothing away from Philadelphia, but the Canucks last night seemed to come back crashing down to earth too.
Yes, they did. They did indeed. Well, I thought what they did in those first 2 games was a little bit, or much more than I expected from them, and it was more like their team in that game they had last night against Philadelphia in the Flyers' own building. And the Flyers, of course, aren't going to be a powerhouse team either by the look of things on paper by that team. But the Canucks, you thought maybe winning those 2 games at Edmonton would have some momentum going in there against such a team, a weak team, and maybe gain a win. But that indeed was not the case. But as I mentioned earlier, really too early in the season to be developing trends on what teams are going to be as the season progresses.
I guess some random thoughts on you. Boy, Austin Matthews back-to-back hat tricks. When we've seen some goals being scored early in other places, Pete.
Yes, indeed. I mean, Toronto with those first 2 games coming off with an abundance of goal scoring, and Austin Matthews getting hat tricks in the first 2 games, and there were big odds on whether he'd become the very first NHL player to get a hat trick in 3 consecutive games to start a season, which he was brought back to life as the Maple Leafs were in their game last night as well. But yeah, there has been an abundance of scoring in the early going around the league, and I think traditionally, if you go back and look at it, and normally the scoring is a little bit higher in the early going before teams get more into their defensive structure. And, we'll see how the progress goes as it moves along here. An interesting aspect, though, Rob, that I noted, and actually I didn't note it. It was a comment that was made by Elliot Friedman on Hockey Night in Canada just prior to the start of the season or early in the season. He made the comment that he thought that the NHL referees have been instructed to call more penalty shots this year. Mm-hmm. And so far this year, we've had 6 penalty shots that have been assessed so far. 2 of them have resulted in goals. So that averages out to a goal or a penalty shot every 6.5 games. Where last year, when you look at the penalty shot statistics, there was 1 penalty shot every 26 games. So it's a real interesting stat to notice how much more penalty shots percentage-wise we've had in the early going. We had last year. The Flames even had one the other night when Coleman had his penalty shot. However, unfortunately, he wasn't able to score a goal on that one. So that's something to watch closely to see if we're going to continue with the trend of having more penalty shots than we've had in recent years around the NHL. As Friedman mentioned, he understood or thought that the referees had been called more of them because there are more of these situations where there are blatant offenses made to players when they had a breakaway or very close to a breakaway. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues, and that'll, of course, add to the scoring trend if it's going to be something that we're going to see on a more regular basis.
Well, and I guess call me a pessimist, but knowing how crackdowns and things work in the National Hockey League, eventually we'll get to some point and somebody will get all frustrated and whine and complain and get a hold of Jeremy Jacobs or Gary Bettman and go, oh, my team got the raw end of that. But it's noticeable. And, you know, again, who turns away from that, right? Who doesn't want to watch that?
Absolutely, because it's an exciting part of the game. I think that's why, if they were instructed to call more, that's why it was done. But you're right. They'll get messages from various teams about calls that they felt shouldn't have been penalty shots. There are too many penalty shots being called, and then Bettman and his people will step in and inform the referees rather quietly not to call as many penalty shots. So but it certainly is a trend early on in the season that we're seeing more frequently than we have in recent past seasons. So we'll see if that continues throughout the course of this campaign.
Any other trends? Any other things in the NHL that?
Well, I think, Rob, I've been keeping tabs on attendance on opening nights home opening nights in the National Hockey League, and I've looked at looking at the Flames. Their attendance on opening night at the Saddle Dome was 17,414 people. That was the announced attendance for that game. Now that's not a bad crowd, but normally on an opening night game, especially home opening game, normally in the history of the Flames, they always have a sellout on opening night. And this time there were 90.2% capacity being used for that particular game rather than 100%. Now, other than the Winnipeg Jets and the Philadelphia Flyers, every other NHL team that's had their home opener, and the four of them still haven't had it, all of them have had at least 100% capacity, some a little over 100% capacity in the announced crowds at those games. So you look at the thing that concerns me is about the Flames is that normally they do sell out their home opening game. And as I mentioned, they didn't this time. And I'm wondering that, there are a number of factors I think that come into play here. One is, of course, the season that they had last year. I know there were a number of season ticket holders that I talked to during the offseason and fans that were not happy with what they saw from the Flames' performance last year. Some of them said they were going to wait and see about their renewing their season tickets and that sort of thing, and see how things would pan out with the team going forward through the summer. So maybe they were waiting a little longer into the season. And another factor there is is the Saddle Dome itself. It's an old building, and we're certainly glad to have the news that plans are going forward now to get the new one constructed. It's going to take a little while before we see the opening doors for that building, but certainly it's a positive note that we're going to have it. But in the meantime, Flames are going to have at least this season and two more seasons in the Saddle Dome. Another thing, there's a lot of road construction going on around the Saddle Dome. And that, I think, it must be another factor that are keeping people away from the building at this particular point in time. I went to one of the preseason games, and of course, I went there real early, so the traffic around the building wasn't bad at all. And then I left about halfway through the second period, so that wasn't a problem leaving. But for people coming, for a game and they're arriving a half hour before or in that range, and then leaving afterwards, it's a tremendous amount of traffic to deal with, the coming and going to the building. Now that's not going to change this year as they continue with now once that's all done, it's going to make a great traffic around the building. But certainly for right now, it's a bit of a deterrent. The thing that concerns me, though, is that I think this year's Flame team on paper is a team that contend and should make the playoffs. Going forward, this team, I think, eventually is going to have to go through a reboot or a rebuild or that sort of thing. And I really wonder what the attendance is going to be like then. I've had fans tell me we're not going to go through this Young Stars thing that we went through again, which, of course, was part of the latter part of the 90s and into this millennium where the Flames were heavily advertising the young players in their system. And this was going to be so great. Well, it didn't turn out so great. The team went 7 straight years with no playoffs, and the attendance in the building was down dramatically. I mean, you can remember, Rob, the start of the 03-04 season, which was such a dramatic season. You go back to the start of that year, there were games that season early on where there weren't 8,000 people that were in the building. And it stayed that way. And then of course, Daryl Sutter, who was the general manager and coach, made the trades that brought in Mika Kiprasov, and then suddenly everything changed. The team that was in last place in the Western Conference at that point in time, in the middle of November, turned around, made themselves get into the playoffs, and then had that tremendous run to the Stanley Cup final. And the sellouts then for that continued for many, many years after that. But during that downtime, I'm sure there were cash calls for ownership of the Flame team because the attendance wasn't where they wanted it to be, certainly well below what they wanted it to be. And hopefully what we're seeing now is a sign that something we might see a little further down the road when this team has to, as I say, reboot or rebuild, because they do have an older team, certainly not as old as Pittsburgh and some of the other teams there that are up their age, but they are a team that have a lot of older players on their team, and they've got 5 or 6 players on the team that the contracts are running out at the end of this year. And one of the reasons why the Flames, people say, well, gee, the Flames never really have been they've been a first place team a couple of years ago in the division, but they've never really been what you would call a Stanley Cup contender for a while. Well, when you look at it, they've always been a team that's been in the middle of the road, or even a little bit better than the middle of the road. And so their drafting position has not been a great one. Certainly not like Edmonton, who've had all those early first overall picks and other early picks that have built their team to what they're at now. And so that has been an issue with the team has been okay on the ice, but it affects their drafting position. If you're not drafting in the top 5 or 6. The chances of you getting a star player, there's the odd guy that does become a 5th round player that turns out to be a standout, but that's a very rare situation. So there's all these elements to take into account here. So not to be on a negative nature, but I'm hopefully this team is not headed in that direction from a standpoint of attendance, because that's the key lifeblood of a National Hockey League team.
I know this because I lived it. There's 2 worlds. There's the fans and the media's world, and then there's the business world. And, the reality is the Flames are a business. CSEC is a business. It's about selling tickets. It's about putting bums in seats. I get and understand why people want rebuilds, Pete. I get it. I understand it. Burn it to the ground. But are you buying tickets for that? To your point, we saw what happened with the young guns. And rebuilds are not automatic. Rebuilds are risk too. Because what you were just talking about, the Flames have never drafted higher than 4th. Are the only.
That's right.
What you'd only. I wouldn't include the last bunch of expansion teams in this conversation, but the Flames are pretty much the only team that's never drafted 1st overall in the NHL. Calgary, Atlanta did, but Calgary hasn't. And you know what, Pete? I think of Alexis Lafreniere and Connor Bedard. You can get a 1st overall pick, but you need to get the right 1st overall pick, right? And to be perfectly honest, Edmonton, Nugent Hopkins is a good player. Hall's a good player, but their ability to win that lottery and get McDavid was just franchise changing. And there's no guarantee there. The only thing that's going to come up here in the next little bit, Pete, is new building fever. That if they can get to the new building fever should carry the business for a couple of years. Absolutely. The novelty of having that new building will create sellouts every night for 2 seasons for sure, if not a little more than that. And that's one of the blessings that's out there for the near future for the Flames. Not the immediate future, but if they can sustain things up until then things will be fine from a standpoint of attendance with the team. So they're back for a homestand next week, so hopefully that'll see the attendance rise up from what we saw on opening night. With the 17-4-1-4. Before I let you go, if you could.
Now, having said that, Rob,
yes.
Having said that, the Winnipeg Jets are in worse shape. In fact, there's now some talk about whether or not Winnipeg's going to be able to continue to have an NHL team. They have played 2 home games, and they have been well below capacity in both of them. Their home opener, they had 88% was the capacity they had that night for their building, which is 13,410 seats. And last night, they had the lowest attendance the Winnipeg Jets have had since they returned to Winnipeg, as they had capacity last night was 74% for that game there in a building that's a small building to start with. They just signed 2 of their top players to long-term contracts. And I remember when that franchise came to Winnipeg from Atlanta, there were a lot of people said, yes, with the novelty here, we're going to have great crowds. I think one of the stipulations to buy a season ticket then is that you had to commit for 5 years. And then, to get the season ticket committed for 5 straight seasons. And that's past that now. And we're seeing how small that crowd is, despite Winnipeg having a pretty good team. It's not being reflected in their home ice attendance. And there is some concern now in Winnipeg about whether or not this team can sustain its time in that city. If they lose a team for the second time, that would be a total disaster for that Manitoba city.
I find it frustrating at times that we spend, and I'm guilty of it, don't get me wrong, but I'm frustrated at times that we spend so much time worrying about the cap going up so the teams can spend more money and not worrying enough about the cost of what it means to be a fan. And, Pete, I used to hear from fans on Overtime and other shows, oh, it's a corporate crowd. It's a corporate crowd. Thank God it's a corporate crowd, because I'll tell you right now, most of the season tickets are bought by corporations, and that's how people go. People get them from other people. You cannot deny that. That's part of the ecosystem. And I'm not a beer drinker, but part of where money is made now is on F&B and retail and all those things. And God bless. But at some point you reach a point where people just throw their arms up in the air and go, that's too much, right? Especially if you're a family. That's always the concern, is when do you breach that threshold? And trust me, Calgary is nowhere near some of these other cities in terms of their food costs and things like that. But with a new building comes new expectations, right?
Absolutely. And you mentioned the cost of tickets, price of tickets is going up. And, in the news, you hear the cost of food going up, the cost of housing going up, the cost of this going up, that going up. So it's, the housing and food is, more of a preference than going to a hockey game.
Yes.
And if they don't have the corporate people buying the season tickets, to your point, it's
Well, I always
hopefully it's going to be good, but I'm just putting out a little point that we're not seeing the crowds that we're used to seeing for Flame games.
But Pete, you and I met.
They're not bad at 17,000, but still, it's not 19,000 we've become used to seeing for just about every Flame game. I know last year I think they only sold out three of the regular season games. So
I'm worried about the Columbuses and the Anaheim games that are middle of the week. Those are, selling those tickets in the middle of the week. Weekends will always be a little bit insulated. Rivals will always be a little insulated, but those midweek games against the weak sisters, and I go back, honestly, Pete, I go back to when you and I first started working together. There was no salary cap. There was a Canadian Equalization Fund. You and I both know, regardless of what anybody else said, there was a gap between the Calgary Flames and the Edmonton Oilers and everybody else. And there was no Winnipeg Jets, and the Maple Leafs were different, but even Montreal was struggling, right? And I get nervous when I hear 11,000 people in Winnipeg. I really do, because that city deserves that team. But
yes, they do, because they've got they get an ardent city of fans. But unfortunately, they're not coming to the games right now in the numbers that they used to, and it's creating some concern in that city. And the fact that they were able to sign Scheifele and the goaltender, to long-term contracts, which many people thought they weren't interested in signing for that 8-year term in Winnipeg. That indeed was the case coming out with the announcement just prior to the start of the season. So it's and then this week you hear this news that their crowds are down substantially.
Well, and it used to be you could sell tickets on spite, and Dubois came back last night with Los Angeles. Like that should have been, in previous times, that would have been a sold out crowd just to boo that guy.
Just to boo the guy. That's right. Yeah. That would have been the incentive, and it would have been a sellout, and everybody would have been in that booing mode. So speaking of booing, I was shocked to hear the fans in Montreal booing Connor Bedard in that game on Saturday night. And I can't figure out why.
Because he was born a year too late.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. Maybe they were mourning his parents who were at the game.
Yeah, because we could have had him. What's wrong with you people? Yeah, I guess it's the good old fashioned rivalry stuff and everything like that. But come on, Pete. You were here in the 80s. People weren't really warm for the greatest player that ever played the game, right?
That's right. Yep. But that was a rivalry.
Sure.
Montreal and Chicago doesn't have quite the rivalry that the Flames and the Oilers ever had. But Oh, well, fans can do whatever they want as long as they don't harm anybody.
They're angry, Pete. The fans are angry.
Yep.
Good to talk to you, my friend. We'll talk to you in a couple weeks. Be well.
Okay, you too, Rob. Great as well. And hopefully the weather's getting a little better. I see it's brighter out now.
Perfect. Well, you made it brighter.
I'm gonna go for a walk.
Okay. Talk to you soon. Thanks.
See you later. Take care, man. Alrighty. Hey, man.
Peter Maher, everybody. He's the greatest. Longtime voice of the Calgary Flames, the 7-time Hall of Famer. Brought to you by Ski Cellar Snowboard, skicellarsnowboard.com. 76 years in Calgary. Nowhere else, Calgary. And they take care of your needs, your skiing needs, your snowboarding needs, your outdoor needs. But more importantly than that, they're people who are going out as well. So you might go in one day and you might not see the guy that sold you your skis or the girl that sold you your snowboard, and you're going to, well, where are they? They're out on the hill because they're adamant and avid outdoors people too. Check them out. 2 locations open right now. McLeod Trail by Chinook Center, Bow Ridge Road Northwest. If nothing else, type in skicellarsnowboard.com into your browser and see what they're up to. Jack's not feeling great, but we're going to get him to answer some questions. Before we do that, along this business stuff, I just wanted to do a little bit of NBA and NFL. So let's start with the NFL, because the NFL has got a couple of projects that I just wanted to highlight. One, and Jack and I were talking about this off the air, so you're probably not going to get what you want out of me because I get it. But Roger Goodell is about or has just signed a new extension. Here's Front Office Sports. According to Kaplan Sports Biz, he signed and finalized his deal. It'll run through 2027. His career earnings are roughly $700 million. $700 million for a guy who, at the best of times, seems standoffish. As a guy who doesn't do a lot of front-facing stuff, and when he does, he's awkward. For a guy that oversaw Deflategate, has overseen some other league silliness, it's easy as a fan, it's easy as a media member to go, what the hey, why are they do this guy couldn't lead a 2-car parade. It's actually the opposite of that. You look at what he has done and how he has positioned this league and how they have been cutting edge in technology and broadcast, how they have just continued to grow and not slow down, but grow exponentially every year. How he has walked them through. The Daniel Snyder situation was not easy. There have been a handful of these really messy, situations involving coaches, but owners in particular, and dealing with the sales of teams and transitioning from names and things that, Goodell, well, publicly probably wouldn't poll better than 35%, 40% in popularity. Behind the scenes, for the people that he works for, he's golden. He's absolutely golden. And so 700 million, that's probably right career earnings for the guy that's guided the league to what just unprecedented heights. The ability to pivot on the sin stuff, to go from gambling is evil and we shall never have anything to do with it, to embracing the money that comes from legalized sports betting, to, well, we can't have players. They've navigated that. I keep coming back to broadcast. The only thing that matters on over the air these days is sports. And the only thing that really matters on over the air these days is the NFL. They still draw, Super Bowl can get close to 100 million eyeballs. There's networks that won't go a month with 100 million eyeballs, but they can still do it. And that's all under the guise or under the leadership of Roger Goodell. So, interesting and kind of sets the standard and how other leagues view their leadership. The other thing that I wanted to talk about too was this is an interesting initiative by the NFL. They're asking, we're going to allow fans to submit ideas. Now, it reminds me a little bit of a digital suggestion box, but the NFL is going to set up a program called NFL Forward. It's a platform that allows anyone to submit creative proposals to advance the game. Emphasis in solutions in tech, flag football, fan experience, and inclusion. Tech and fan experience will be really interesting. Flag football will be really interesting. Inclusion, I'm curious to see what they get out of that. The question I have for something like this is, if you come up with this new fan experience idea, how do you, and you submit it to the NFL, the last thing on earth I want to do, and I have nothing against the legal community, lawyers and judges or anything like that, but so you give up your idea, or how do you get rewarded if you come up with the next big idea? But I thought this was really cool. It's a start. I want to see how it works out. My hope is that if they get something that works, they tell us about it. Like, this was submitted by a fan through the NFL Forward program. They made an actual tangible difference in the game. By the way, we mentioned this a couple of days ago. Flag football added to the 2028 Olympic Games. And you're now starting to hear the possibility of NFL players wanting participation in that. Just saw it briefly today. Didn't do a deep dive on it today. Just saw that some NFL players have already begun, current active players. One NBA note, and then we'll get to some questions and we'll call her a day. The LA Clippers are just putting the final touches on their building. I wanted to share a little bit of this with you, courtesy of Front Office Sports. $1.2 billion future home of the Clippers. If you have TurboTax or Intuit is anyway, the one that all of us small business owners use. How about this? Power at every seat. Power. So conceivably, you could charge your phone, your devices, or whatever, power at every seat. An acre scoreboard, double the toilets of any NBA arena. You laugh, but the number one complaint about old buildings and new buildings in Edmonton, I'm looking at you, is the lineups in the washroom. That it does not appear that you can build a facility with enough toilets. And then the wall. No suites, just 51 rows of seats for fans. So by not putting in suites, you're taking away your premium services, and now that makes other premium services harder and maybe more expensive. But this innovation is interesting to me. I said it off the top, very curious to see what innovations we will have in Calgary, or are we just going to build state of the art of what we've always had? No, we won't have, power at every chair, but we'll have some power up centers or something like that. No, we're not thinking like the Saddle Dome took a risk with the roof to fit in, to be part of the skyline, the whole nine. It's iconic, but it eliminated load lift. And at the time, nobody was thinking we'd ever need a roof to support the weights that we now needed to support. Thus, once we started getting into these big lighting rigs, concerts couldn't necessarily come to Calgary anymore. I'm very curious what, the wall in Los Angeles for the Clippers. Is that something they're going to renovate in 10 years and put suites into? Or is that going to catch on as the next big thing? Somebody's got to do it first. Somebody's got to do it best. So that's what the LA Clippers are up to. Jack, I know you're a little under the weather, but do we have any questions or concerns we need to clear up before we call our show?
Yeah, we got a couple questions here. Apologies that I do not sound the greatest.
All good.
Do you think the Calgary Flames have a likable roster? Is this a team that fans are getting behind?
Is this a team that fans are getting behind? Likable. What an interesting question. I think it can be. I don't know what the fans. I haven't got a good read. I think after wins and losses, you get a little bit of this, so you get a little bit of that. I think the coach is approachable. I think the star players on this team can be approachable. I think Michael Backlund's as approachable as a, as a hockey player can be. I think Dubé, when he's on his game, is fun to watch. I think Coronado gets you excited. When and if Wolf gets here, I think he will. So, yes, I think Zadorov's got some personality to him. Do I think it's likable? Yeah, I think it's likable. But your number one aspect of any Q rating will be your success. If they win, they'll be really likable. Hell, that team that last year I was on Sportsnet, that team that with Butler and, after they moved to Ginla and Bouwmeester, Kandari, those guys were all likable, but it's a terrible team, right? Terrible team.
Rob, I do have a question for you. Right now at the Flames, do you have a player that you're super excited to watch every night when the Flames are playing, or do you not really feel that way about anyone?
Coronado.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think so, because I stuck my neck out a little bit early on, saying that this is a guy that I think if the team's going to have success, his name's got to be in the Calder conversation. It's not right now. It's just not. But I like watching him out on the power play. It has become apparent to me once again how big a jump it is, or, preseason and regular season, they're not even the same game. They ought to give them different names. You ought to call the other one Squabble or something, because it's not NHL hockey. And he looked, when he was playing Squabble, he was great. When he's in the NHL right now, he looks lost at times, and, other times he looks good. He's one. And I guess Markstrom, I probably always defer back to the bias of the goaltender. I think it's, like the pitcher, like the quarterback, it's the unique position. I've talked to Jacob Markstrom. I think he's a really neat human being. I thought he had a great year 2 years ago. He was terrible last year. That's the nature of the sport. And I don't know if it's so much I like to watch him. It's just, if he plays okay, then it kind of takes his whole one conversation away. But if he lets in that early goal, it's like, oh, here we go again. And it leads to, down a counterproductive conversation that, you have to have, right?
Yeah. Next question here. Who are the best guests that would randomly show up in the Hot Stove Lounge?
Best guests that would randomly show up in the Hot Stove Lounge. Ville Nieminen for sure. Ville Nieminen would hang out when his career was winding down with San Jose. He wasn't playing. He'd just show up after the game and sit in there and grab a beer and drink. And every once in a while, we put a headset on him. Chris Sutter, a young Chris Sutter. Every once in a while, he would work his way down and sit and listen. And Darryl would get a little panicked to where he was, and he'd find him in the Hot Stove Lounge. Kenny Holland with Detroit, and I'm sure now with Edmonton, the same thing. He was the easiest guy. Like, Kenny, you want? Yep. You wouldn't even finish the question, and he came in every time. I just remember one time he came in and he had some gum in his mouth, and he went to take the gum out, and I started pointing at the garbage, which was behind the door, but Kenny thought I was getting rid of him, and he turned around and he left, and we're like, where did Kenny go? And so I think it was Will or somebody bolted into the hallway, caught him at the elevator. He said, oh, I thought you guys didn't want me. I thought you were getting rid of me. No. Come on in. Yeah, I mean, Barry Trotz would stop by. Boudreau would stop by. Anybody with a connection to the Flames, if they came back in, like McElhaney was with Anaheim, he popped his head in. God bless him. We talked about him the last show. Steve Monador was always, he was with Anaheim or Florida, wherever, he was always coming in. Ken King would come in and he'd throw stuff and throw beef jerky at us and mess up our papers and then leave. So there was quite a community that came in and participated in the Hot Stove Lounge. I miss it dearly.
Last question for you.
Sure.
How was the transition going from media to working with the Flames?
It was interesting. It took me a while. I had done it before, so it wasn't, I'd worked on the team side before, and I'd worked in game operations before, but yeah, it just reinforces to me that there's two worlds, right? There's the fan and the media world, and then there's the business world, and the things that each value, or the things that are important, are not necessarily the same things. I mean, ultimately, I think everybody wants a great fan experience. I think the fans want that, the team wants that, the media wants that. You want it to be a fun environment. You want it to be, even for the media. There isn't a media person alive that says, I'd rather cover a team that doesn't make the playoffs. You want to be in those meaningful games and those types of things. Probably I would say it was more difficult from going from the media side to the team side than it would be the other way, just because the priorities are different, right? It's about selling tickets, it's about selling merchandise, it's about, for me anyways, about creating future fans. I could have talked about that with Pete when he was talking about attendance. I think one of the most important things for and we do it with the Surge, or and I know the Cavalry are working on it, but it's future fan development. The Calgary Hitmen, there's a lot of reasons the Calgary Hitmen exist, but to me, the biggest reason the Calgary Hitmen exist is they should be your first visit to the Dome as a young person, that you should be used to coming to the Dome because you were able to come to Hitman games. The price point, the accessibility, even the crowds being a little smaller, it's a little easier to get around. That's where you should be setting up and building your fans, so that, follow them. Then you've got college packages and high school packages from group sales, and then you follow them all the way through. And it, once they get to the business world, well, I've been going to the Dome for all these years. It's just natural for me to buy tickets. So, yeah, it took a while. It was a little bit of a transition, I won't lie, but it wasn't something that I wasn't used to either. I had done it before. But I'm here to tell you, it's completely different priorities.
Another question came in here, Rob, actually, relating to the Hitmen. With the Wranglers coming to Calgary, has that hurt the Hitmen?
Well, I don't know specifically in the business numbers because I left after or before that, but I think it has. I mean, just anecdotally, I think it's this. They have done nothing to split the markets, which is easier said than done. I think if you look at the Flames are a specific market, they're a premium market, upscale market. The Stampeders can be both. The Roughnecks really play to a younger audience. At least that's what they want to market. But I think the Wranglers and the Hitmen, in many ways, it probably just split that fan base. I think one of the hardest things to do is to create two individual fan bases in the same sport in the same location that can be self-sustaining. So again, I'm beating a dead horse here, but part of the reason why I've squawked so loudly that the practice facility should have been 5,000 seats is you need to separate them. Even if it's just putting them across the street, you need to separate them. It's hard to have neither of those teams really have an identity. They can't put ice logos in. They can't really do anything within the bill. Yeah, they can change up the board signs and the graphics packages and stuff like that, but they're still playing in the Flames building. So, from a business standpoint, you have to look at the cost that it was to run the team in Stockton. Healthcare alone was, a huge bill for CSEC, I believe. So, the good probably outweighs the bad, but I think it's just been really difficult to try and establish two fan bases. They'll tell you they have, and I'm sure they have in some cases, but the Hitmen have their handful of games that they're going to draw really well. Teddy Bear and Be Brave and Every Child Matters, and now it's up to the Wranglers to find their games that they can do the same thing. But I suspect that both teams are those midweek games. I don't care, like 1 team, 2 teams, 5 teams. Midweek sporting events are hard to sell. They're hard to get interest. And the problem is you try to avoid playing them, but everybody's trying to avoid playing them. And unless you go to an all weekend league system, somebody's got to play midweek, and you're going to be forced to. And there's going to be some times when you're going to have to suck it up, and there's going to be less than 1,000 people in the building.
That'll do it for today. Thanks.
That'll do it for today. All right, buddy. Before we go home, just want to tip my hat. Speaking of the Calgary Flames, Andrew Mangiapane yesterday announcing a new community program called Mange's Breadsticks. Love it. I believe it's in the community of Ogden, and it's going to use hockey to teach kids from troubled and difficult backgrounds the skills that they need in life. What's important to me is that young men like Mangiapane put their names on their programs. This is exactly what Jerome did. This is exactly what Lanny did. Mark Giordano did. So many of the Flames that have come before have given back to the community. I know that and I apologize, I believe it's fiance, but it might be girlfriend, is participating with them as well, which I think is fantastic. And they'll get the full support of Candace Gowdy and the foundation, which is great. But I love, player like, and he's tied it in with the Italian Sportsman's Dinner. They were always tied in with Mark Giordano. And that particular event is, as everybody knows, one of the premier sports fundraisers in all of Calgary, and they put their weight behind this. So just a tip of the hat to Andrew Mangiapane for his breadsticks program. I love it. Congratulations. Let's see more of it. We're back on Friday. Guest to be named later. I guess I'll have to do some work today. Really looking forward to that conversation, though, because we'll be through the Buffalo game and getting ready for the Columbus game for the Calgary Flames. The Stampeders are actually going to play in BC on Friday night. And gosh darn it, didn't you know it's actually now a meaningful game? And the Cavalry are at home on Saturday to Pacific. Winner of that game moves on to the finals to play the Forge. So a lot going on in the city, a lot of positive stories we want to get to, but some challenging ones as well. It's just a game, right? At the end of the day, it's just a game. I cannot say enough good things about Jack, our producer, for making this show happen today. It shouldn't have happened, but he made it happen. So really proud of the kid. He deserves a raise. Unfortunately, I can't give it to him, but I'll talk to somebody. You can guarantee that. Have a great couple of days. We're back with you on Friday. Talk to you later, everybody.